for a couple more people. I'm going to text Phil Rankin and see if he's planning on joining us.
Actually, are there documents that we
at
were?
the bottom of the Google Calendar invite?
Okay.
You'll see documents, and they're also in the Google folder. Emily was going to attend as well. She had confirmed with me, so I'll text both her and Phil just to make sure. But we'll get started in just a minute here. If you'll give me a sec.
When I click away to open documents like that, do you still see me? I just don't see, or yeah.
Yes. I think you would have to share your screen, Sharon, for us not to see you.
Okay. Hey, Bob, how did the reading go last night?
The what?
Did you read to Gurney last night?
No, they moved me to like the 21st, I think.
Okay.
Nick, where are you?
I got caught up at the kids were hanging out with some friends, and we were supposed to get back. We were supposed to get back about a half an hour ago, and I got told no. So I'm taking the call from a car now.
Well, at least it's sunny.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I did send just quick reminders to everybody else. Let me just get over here to the agenda. So I'm just going to open the meeting, but the majority of the meeting I'm just going to hand over to Ashley. But first is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Did anybody have any changes or any updates to those minutes? And,
No.
The only thing, Catherine, is it did show me as being in attendance, but I don't recall being at that meeting.
oh, okay, that was my bad. I thought you were there, so I will.
I think I came after February 3rd.
Okay.
Right? Those are the minutes we're approving?
Yes.
Yes. But that was the last meeting. That was your first meeting.
Huh.
Right, Jim? You've only been to one meeting.
The last meeting I remember was an audit committee meeting.
Oh, okay.
And I looked, it wasn't in my calendar, so
Okay.
I don't think I was there.
All right. Okay, we'll make that change. Any other changes?
I move approval.
Okay, let's go ahead and approve the minutes. And then the next thing on the agenda is we had talked about terms for our committee members. And
Real quick, we have a motion, but can I get a second and
oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll second.
okay.
All in favor, raise your hand. Anybody opposed?
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm trying to switch over here to today's agenda. Here we go. And then, so I'm gonna have to find the email I sent you, Ashley. Do you have it in front of you, the term rotation that we had talked about?
I do. So you had for a term ending December 21st, we had Nick and Jim. And then term ending December of 22, we had John and Emily. Emily's not here to speak for herself, but we can probably extend hers if we want.
Does that sound good to everybody? I had confirmed that, I think, with most of you verbally. The idea here is that we want to involve community members as long as they're interested in staying involved and can make the commitment. And we would like to avoid having a complete turnover of our community members in any one given year. So this way we kind of stagger. If anybody is looking to step off, they kind of know when the term would end, and we would bring somebody new in. It doesn't mean you have to step off at the end of your term. It just means we'll have a conversation about your ability to continue and you know, the commitment involved, et cetera. So, so if everybody's good with that, we will move forward. Okay. And so I'll turn the meeting over to Ashley at this point.
Okay, so the last time we were together, our situation was a lot different than it is now. So I'm just going to kind of give you a brief history of what has happened since February 3rd. At that point in time, we were looking at potentially a 7.9 mil levy in this calendar year. That was going to get us, we were looking at 4 years, potentially 5. With that, we were considering some additional larger capital projects. When COVID-19 happened and the economy took a downturn, we began talking, and the board kind of recognized the fact that, you know, life is different for everybody. And asking the community for 7.9 mils right now might not be the smartest decision. So from there, we started reworking things and looking for what we could do to lower the ask. So at that point in time, we had a list of cuts that we had already put together and we had already put in place. The beginning of the fiscal year, the board asked Dr. Hunt and I to cut 1% from our budget. We did that. We found $350,000 to cut without too much pain. We did it, you know, through attrition. We made some decisions on moving some things around. We had someone leave a position that we were able to take from a full-time down to a part-time, things like that. So we had already cut $350,000 going into next year. So we were looking at that. In addition, we had higher tax collections this year than we had anticipated. Part of that is we collected more delinquencies, and we had property values for 19 were higher than what I had anticipated in the 5-year forecast. So the situation looked a little better. With the cuts that we had, we were looking at doing a potentially 3.85 mils, which, if you'll recall, we were talking about doing a combined levy and splitting it up into 4 mils, which is what is falling off, or at the time that was our estimate. That's what would be falling off from our debt that will be retired this year. The actual number, I've gotten numbers back from Cuyahoga County. The actual number that's going to fall off is 3.85 mils. So we started talking, what if we just did 3.85 mils? That way everybody's tax bill stays the same. The millage does not increase. And that still helps us get through. With the cuts that we had already put in place, we were looking at trying to stretch that to 3 years. We thought things were, you know, that was possible. And then last Wednesday, we received news from the state that our foundation funding for this fiscal year that we're currently in, our foundation funding was being cut by almost $534,000. To put that into perspective, that's about 32% of what we get from the state. Obviously, that changes things, and that's not for next year, that's for this year. So, you know, we can't go back to the beginning of the year and make cuts and react. So any cuts that we would make in response to that are going to have to be in the next fiscal year. So now we're looking at scenarios that include that. So if you've had a chance to review scenarios that I sent or the draft 5-year forecast, what that includes is assuming that the governor's cut of more than $500,000 for this year continues. That's really up in the air. We have no indication of what's going to happen next year. I've heard 20% cut across the board. I've heard just keep the same cut. I don't know. So trying to forecast is not easy. The forecast, if tomorrow morning I come into work and I have an email that, hey, they've reconsidered and the cuts this year are a different number, I will update the forecast, and I'll continue to update it right up until next Wednesday when the board has to approve it, if things change. So right now, what you have is our best guess of what it's going to look like, but there's a lot of variables in there. So I'll pause there.
So Ashley, I just had a quick question on the general property tax going from fiscal 2020 to 21. It's going down about 1.4 million or 5.5%. What is driving that? Is that the line where the state funding shows up? And if it is, what is driving the 1.4 million decrease?
That is taxes only.
Okay.
So what's driving that is two things. Number one, because of the downturn in the economy, we expect collections to go down. What I did was pull information from the county. They gave me what our collection rates were back in 2008, which is our best guess about, what's going to happen with our economy right now. This is really unprecedented, but 08 is probably our best year that we can compare to. So I pulled those collection rates. It doesn't hit us as hard as it does some other districts, but our collection rate is combined with our current collection rate, and then to get to the total collection rate, we add in our delinquencies. So our current collection rate back then was 95.5, and then it kind of slowly came up. So I went into the forecast and I changed those collection rates to reflect that. So the collection rate goes down. In addition, we had a significant delinquency collection this year. So, and that one's kind of, the delinquency collections is much harder to anticipate and predict.
Okay.
Ashley, similar to that, do you have any assumption for property valuation reassessments that might be increased in a down economy and then result in reduced collections?
Right. So the way the forecast works is we do have changes in valuation in there. We've got 2 counties going in there and they're on different cycles. So it makes our total kind of hard to predict. But I do have, I can give you what the actual valuations estimates are. I don't recall exactly what they are for every year right now.
I guess the question is, did you adjust those from the last forecast, anticipating that there might be, more property valuation complaints?
Yeah, yes and no. So I would anticipate, yes, that they would go down because of those complaints. However, our valuation for 19 was higher than I had expected. So overall, the rate now is not lower than it was in November, if that makes sense. Because in November, I had lower property values than what happened. So I got the information then after the forecast, property values are higher. So now, even though that we do expect some of those things to go down on some of those tax complaints, it's still not going to be lower than it was in November because our valuations are higher now than they were in November.
Emily?
Hi, Emily.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late. I thought it was at 7 for some reason.
Oh, that's
so
okay.
I'm glad you texted me because otherwise I would have called in at 7 and been
catching
no
the
worries. So we're on.
Anyway.
We're looking at the 5-year forecast.
Okay.
And we're asking Ashley some questions about the assumptions that she made in the forecast. Right now, we're talking about the revenue assumption from property tax. And Ashley was explaining that she did reduce the collection rate. Was it 95%?
95.5 for next year.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. Say that one more time.
95.5 for next
Okay.
year is what I'm expecting for our current collections, and then add the delinquency collections into there to get a total collection rate.
Okay. And then we were just also talking about the fact that people may challenge their property values if the economy does continue, in a downward trend, and that could also affect our collections, which is kind of in the assumption, but maybe there, might be something for us to just earmark that could be an additional risk factor. May not be fully captured. That's my assessment. Is that anybody else have any? Okay, and so
Cuyahoga County just had it was the cycle where there was a lot of assessments. When is Geauga's next?
Hold on, I can tell you that.
Remember, people can submit a complaint at any time. It doesn't have to be after one of the.
No, but I think we get more volume of it when they're getting notified of.
Right. No, I agree. Just want to remind everybody.
Yeah, they have to have comparables, and right now with real estate sales slowing, it's hard for them to justify without comparables a downward valuation.
Right. Now it's. I think what we're doing right now is really vetting the forecast to see if we feel that the assumptions are conservative enough, for our comfort level.
I believe
standing on for the levy.
To answer your question, Sharon, I believe Geauga's is this year.
Okay.
Okay. Ashley, would you go through any, the other major assumptions in the forecast that you think are really driving the numbers? Especially since Emily just joined us, you might want to recap, what's happening with revenues, what's happening with expenses, and then we'll come back to questions.
So revenue, we covered property taxes. The line 1.035 is the unrestricted grants and aid. That's where you see the state revenue coming in. We expected 1.8 approximately, and now that's down to about 1.2. And that's just as a result of the cut that we found out about last week. So should that change, that's a big. Is that me?
Hey, Phil, you might want to mute yourself because I think it's your car that we're hearing.
Yep. Thank you.
I've done it. Don't worry.
So should that change, that number, that's a $500,000 swing each year. And again, that one is at our best guess right now, could change tomorrow morning.
Do we know if that cut is just 1 year or is that going forward?
We don't know. Right now, it's for this year. It's for this current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. And they've given us really no information for subsequent years. I've never heard of them, 85% through the year changing the allocation. They do the biennium, they do the budget on a 2-year basis. And this last time they did not use a formula. They just said, okay, everything that you got last year, everybody's going to get the same amount. And then, last Wednesday changed that. So I don't know.
Ashley, so Emily, you know that these cuts are immediate. They're affecting this fiscal year for 2020, which ends in July. So
I figured that out after, yeah.
Yeah, and so Ashley's forecasting the same level of state funding as we're going to end up with this year. It is a question, though. I mean, there's a good possibility that we'll have additional cuts to our state funding. And if we wanted to be even more conservative, we could forecast, a higher number there.
Yeah, the problem with this is, there's a lot of people in the same boat as us. There are a lot of districts that are facing the same issues. There's work underway. There are people trying to get this to change. Whether or not that's going to happen, I honestly don't know. They only ever give us 2 years out. So beyond the 2 years, we're always kind of just throwing a dart. This year, beyond June 30th, we really don't know what's going to happen. So my best guess is just to keep our current level of funding, and that's applied throughout the forecast.
I would just throw in that, Ashley's on with treasurers around the state every day, and I've been on with superintendents with a variety of issues. Everybody is carrying that cut forward, and is just, hoping that that's the extent of the cut. I don't think anyone is under the impression, unless there's a change in the very near future, that that number is going to change going up.
I actually heard, I was on a board president call this morning, that Northeast Ohio group, and there were several on that call that are anticipating greater cuts. Now, we had more significant cuts compared to our total than many of them. But I do think that is something districts are considering, that it's a real possibility.
Right. So our cut was 32%, and it was a 3.7% overall statewide. So if the cut next year is 20% statewide, they typically don't, as evidenced by what happened last week, they don't take the cuts and just apply them evenly. Districts like us with higher perceived wealth get cut more. So, I'm not extremely hopeful that things are going to get any better.
And I think it's important for this committee to understand that's what they refer to as the capacity measure. So essentially I think the cuts are from 1% to 52% or 55%. Rocky River was the highest in the state of Ohio. And they essentially use property wealth to determine that. I know Matt Dolan is local senator, and he's worked very hard to advocate that this should have been a straight across the board cut. The way the funding system used to work with foundation formula was based on property wealth as it is. So we're already paying less or getting less, from the state of Ohio on our foundation, or had been, and now we're getting kind of a double whammy. But I would like to acknowledge Matt is doing everything he can to at least make a case for us at the state level.
We certainly appreciate that.
Ashley and Bob, can you also talk about the state, how did it affect charter schools? And I think there's some inequities that are important to call forward, because this committee might get questions from people about.
Right.
And can I say just one more thing to that point is, I think we can only get another 1.5 million in cuts total, right? You're not going to have us pay them money?
I think she has 1.2 million in the forecast. So we could, right. 1.2 million is the additional potential loss.
So we could, okay.
I wish you hadn't said that.
I know. I would say never, Greg. Let's not give anyone any ideas.
Yeah, you laughed, but actually this year, if this $534,000 cut stands, yes, we are sending them a check, because they've already given us more than.
Oh, I understand, but net wise, we're not. But
No.
I'm just wondering if they take us down to, can they take us
Negative.
down below zero?
So we're just cutting checks to other districts. I would
I'm
hope
just pointing
not.
out that I would assume that there's a cap of another 1.2 million they could take, or about
That's all that they're giving
2.5
us,
mils. What?
That's all they're giving us is another $1.2 million. So
Okay.
yeah.
Ashley, could you repeat the percentage of cuts for announced in terms of the state level, and then what the percentage was for Sharon?
So the state, it was 3.7% of total foundation funding across the state for public schools. And there's 610 districts, I believe. Our cut was almost 32%. And the range was 0.7 to 55. So there are some districts that only received a 0.7% cut and some that received a 55%.
Yeah. Schools like us, they basically took like $304 per student, regardless, and it's just how much money you're getting from the state determines your percentage.
Yes.
It's in essence what they did.
Right. So, yeah, they divide us typically when they're doing all of these formulas, and they change the formula every few years. They divide us into quintiles. That's what they really like to do. They divide us into quintiles. And of course, we're always, in the highest quintile for their perception of our wealth. So we got the largest cut. Part of the advocacy for most treasurers, that I spoke to last week, is there's this CARES funding out there, which is federal, it's not state, but that's thought to be relief. For us, however, we're getting $40,000, and then they're cutting us 533. And the way the CARES funding is being distributed essentially generally favors the lower wealth districts as well. So we're getting the largest cut and getting the least relief. Whereas there are other districts that are getting much smaller cuts and much more relief. So the net result of those two items, there were two spreadsheets that were sent out last week, and I took the CARES funding spreadsheet and combined it with the cut spreadsheet, and the net effect for some districts is millions of dollars in windfall. For us, our net effect was a negative $281 per student, and there were districts that their net effect was a positive $900 per student. So, there's a huge inequity there. And I think that's part of what, I know of several letters and emails that were sent and just trying to explain that. And most of the treasurers from the districts that are in a position like us brought that forward and said, look, this is resulting in a huge windfall for some districts. It doesn't make sense to be so completely devastating to a district like us and be, a huge windfall to another. So I don't know. Hopefully we'll get some traction on that. I'm not sure. Are there any other questions on that?
So with regard to our revenues, obviously every forecast has risks, and I know when we get the full thing, you're going to itemize. Is there any other risk that you want to call out in the assumptions that's, above and beyond?
No, I mean, those are the two largest items. The 1.05 property tax allocation, that is tied to the property taxes. So obviously if that goes down, that line will go down as well. Again, the uncertainty there is, it makes me very uncomfortable. This is the least confident I've ever been in a forecast right now. So yeah, the problem.
And Ashley, this is the most uncertain time I've ever experienced in my life.
Yes. The problem with forecasting too conservatively is creating a position, creating a picture where we're looking like we're in a much worse position than we are, and then going out and asking the communities to support us. We try to forecast as accurately as possible. And of course we want to be conservative, but we don't want to be so conservative that we're creating a picture that isn't correct.
Yeah, I think that's what you've done here. And I know you've grappled with this for a very long time. This is a great opportunity for the committee to understand your thought process and where there are some uncertainties and call those out. And it's going to be especially relevant as we look at, the levy cycle and the levy scenarios, because a lot of it rests on, are these going to be our revenues and are these going to be our expenses? And so that's the only reason why I wanted to certainly call forward any unusual risk factors or anything unusual in the assumptions that you think would be relevant. Do you want to move on to the expenses?
I have a question on the risks. If you guys thought about it, do you think like people doing online school next year and us shelling out $6,000 per student is a potential for them to do that?
I think that's always a possibility. What Greg is talking about is when individuals go to a community school and they go to an online format in one of these schools, what happens is we have a deduction and our foundation comes out of our foundation funding and goes to that community school. That community school gets $6,020 per student, whereas we get, we were getting $959 per student, and reduce that by the 304, And, that's a big difference. So yeah, it's a possibility that deduction could go up.
I thought you were talking about College Credit Plus and more students enrolling for college level courses. Is there a max on that as well?
There's not. I mean, that's a choice of a student. Greg, I would say we monitor enrollment weekly, especially this time of the year and especially during, these times. We have not seen a drop in enrollment. We have had some new enrollment from private schools coming, either back to the district or enrolling in our school with comments about online schooling.
When would be the cutoff for that? Like when can they make a decision that they want to do online school? Is that coming up soon?
We don't regulate that. They don't.
So they could do it in the fall.
Yeah, CCP has a cutoff.
Okay.
We kind of know our risk and our liability.
Yeah. I'm just scared if the governor says go back to school and there's a lot of parents who are scared about sending their kids to school. That's the thinking. And then they still sign up for online school because they don't want to send their kid to school. So that's to me.
That's not the case. Yeah, hopefully that's not the case, especially with what we're kind of trying to put together going into next year. Even if we're in a virtual environment, I would put anything that we would offer up against that, certainly.
Okay.
Of course, I
would agree.
But Greg, it's a great point. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here is, look at that's on the expense side, anything that could be a significant change and due to the current environment. So that was a great point brought up.
Why? Just because we haven't seen I was sort of putting out, because I haven't seen the plan yet for next year. And if part of the plan is we would offer online school to people who would want to do online school versus coming to school, then that could be mitigated by that. But
it could be offered online school to everybody.
Right, but that's like a future plan. Right. They're planning that right now, so I didn't want to jump the gun.
Also, just to kind of clarify, also one more question. You were saying, or Bob was saying that people are enrolling back from private schools with comments about online schooling. Does that mean that they are enrolling in Chagrin with the intention to then go to a fully online program that we
and this isn't
subsidized or because of
this isn't a large number. We've, I think, heard it from 3 students that have enrolled at the high school level saying, if we're essentially going to be in a blended online environment in the fall, we would, just prefer to be in school. And I'm sure that has something to do with tuition costs of private schools.
Okay. Got it. So, but it sounds like the intention is that they're actually going to attend Chagrin schools. Is that what you're saying, or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so moving to the expenditure side, I think the real uncertainty here is what's going to happen and how we're going to be providing education. And I don't think that anybody has an answer to that. I'm on several Zoom calls a week. I know Bob is on twice as many as me where they're discussing these things. And there are, believe me, more questions than answers. Depending on what we have to do, we may see expenditures increase. There's a calculation out there right now for how much you need to be spending, how much hand sanitizer you need to purchase. That sounds like something that shouldn't be, a huge expense. But when you start calculating every single child and 10 pumps per day and, whatever these regulations are that get put in place, we have to accommodate those and we have to purchase these things. And these are things that we have not purchased before. So, that's an uncertainty there. Expenditures could go up for that. On the flip side of that, if maybe say fall comes and we're in the same situation that we're in right now, and we're not providing, we're not doing, say fall sports doesn't happen, or, kids are at home and we're not transporting them. We're not running the buses. Those are savings. We're not putting fuel in the buses and all those kinds of things. Those are all uncertain right now. We have no idea what's going to happen. So the expenditures that are in here are typical expenditures that we've had in a normal, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, but in a normal school year. So if, you know, there are huge regulations and things that we have to put in place that cost us a lot of money, expenditures are going to go up. If we're all at home still or again, and we're no longer running some things that we've been able to realize some savings this year, that could happen again as well.
Yeah.
Have you,
I'm sorry?
have you calculated what happens if we don't have football next year, basketball next year? All of those things are, I think, up for grabs. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of the rules?
Right. You know, I think it's on everybody's radar. We've got some total estimates for, you know, what we pay coaches and if we need uniforms and all that, you know, the athletic budget in general. But specific sports, I don't have that offhand, no.
Okay.
Yeah, but this, so this is, as I look at like the go forward years, yeah, this is truly base cases, assuming, you know, similar or static head counts, same medical insurance programs, same purchase services. I mean, yeah, this is truly base case, right? I mean, obviously we've been discussing, you know, different levels of cost saving measures that we can do, different things that we can do with medical insurance. So this is truly, you know, so look, I mean, just looking at the numbers, it looks like a true base case to me on the expense side. Save one line item I'd like to ask you about, but okay, so I understand what's going on the income side. You've rationed that back a little bit, but as far as expense, it's truly base case. It looks like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about the one line item? And I'm sure I probably should know what this is, but it just flips positive, negative, and it's negative. You know, for at least 2021 on out, like 6.010 expenditure and other financial uses.
So that is the excess. That's your year's excess or deficit.
Okay, it's like net
That's
income.
your revenues minus your expenditures.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's why going forward. Yeah, so
Yeah.
as we continue to go, we don't. If there's no levy built into here, so as our expenditures continue to go up and our revenues stay flat, that deficit continues to get larger.
Yeah. Gotcha.
That's actually, from my perspective, that's the most important line on the forecast.
Yeah, or 10.010.
Yeah, everybody always wants to look at the cash balance, but that annual variance there is what's driving that cash balance. So I actually think that's more important.
Yeah, they're interrelated.
Yes.
Got it.
Ashley, any other items on the expense side that you would call out as being, you know, different? And also, can you speak to some of the cuts that we've already, you know, it's great to see. I was trying to run some percentages real quick here. We have only from last year to this year, only 0.17% growth in expenses. That was very intentional. I think with some very hard work done by the administration to identify some cost savings. So if you could speak to those a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, so in here, these items that we are already implementing and items we've already made decisions on, those are in this forecast. So when I talk about that high level and I say $350,000, that's in here. And yes, that is a lot of hard work by the administration and the staff as well, you know, for really looking for best prices, and they're really, you know, doing their part to shop around and tighten where they can. So some of the things that we were able to do during the year, we did an audit of some of the aides. The result of that is that we're down about one aide position. We switched some things. You know, one small thing is we switched who our investments are with. That's, you know, going to save us about $5,000 a year. We have many other small things that we kind of just looked at throughout the year. I don't have those on my list here because they're just little numbers here and there, but they do add up. The middle school French position, we moved from a full-time position to a half-time position. That's savings. Starting next year, we have a retirement at the high school that we are not going to replace. That's one FTE. We're going to be down one FTE at the intermediate school. The department and those budgets are, I'm estimating a savings of about $150,000. I don't have everybody's final budgets yet, but the limits that were set on those, those tend to go up each year because that's, where they're just going out to the marketplace and buying supplies, and prices go up every year. So we're holding all of those flat, and that's about $150,000 savings there too. So, we've done a lot. We've done what we can, and that was before we were in the position that we're in. And so now we're faced with looking for more. Do you want to talk about those items, things that were?
No, I want to stay with the forecast for right now, and make sure everybody understands the assumptions in there. And are there any other questions about the forecast itself?
Have there been discussions with the teachers union over their attitudes towards our plight?
Yeah, I've had initial preliminary conversations with both our classified and certified staff, and I would say that they're both doing their due diligence right now. They're waiting for a copy of this forecast to see, and I think they all understand the state cuts and the impact of those, and we'll continue to work with both of those leaders going forward here.
Thank you.
Ashley, are there any additional, you talked about some headcount reductions that, just make sense without any layoffs, which is always kind of nice. Are there any headcount increases that you have in the forecast?
No, we were looking at a potential increase in kindergarten that is no longer needed, right, Bob? I hope.
I made the decision this week to move a second grade teacher to a kindergarten due to the enrollment in kindergarten, and raise the class size in second grade as part of a kind of a cost avoidance strategy.
Yeah, kindergarten numbers are up this year, so we were initially thinking that we may need to add a teacher there, but
yeah, to be clear, we are adding a teacher. We're just we're transferring a second grade teacher down, and we're just raising those class sizes to cover
second grade. Was second grade the smallest class size before this? I think
wasn't it going to be the largest? It's going from 7 classes to 6, as I understand.
It is. Okay. That's correct.
So the class sizes will be raised from, I think, 19 to
22.
22.
All right.
Okay. Yep. I only know this because I have 2 future second graders.
I was really impressed for a second. I was like, wow.
Education from the district.
You're in the know because that was like 24 hours old.
Right. I occasionally read the emails that the district sends, occasionally. So.
Okay. So
but kindergarten's getting a great teacher.
That's great, Emily. Any other questions or comments about the forecast? If not, we can move on. This is the May update that Ashley is working on. She'll be bringing that to the board at our next meeting. And you guys may know forecasts they're constantly updated, but they're formally updated twice a year with the state, and they can be refiled more often than that if we would choose to. But this is the information we're really going to use then as we go into the next phase of our discussion tonight, which is about our need for a levy. As you know, we had a very robust discussion in January and February, which Jim, unfortunately, you weren't part of the committee then, but you can see from looking at the forecast that it was pretty easy for us to identify a need to put a levy on the ballot to bring in additional revenue starting next year, which would mean the levy would need to be passed this year. We talked about waiting until next year, and we're less comfortable with that as a committee, seeing the needs of the district. And then, as you know, as we kind of get into our cash balance and lower that, it results in a higher millage of a levy or a less length of time that the levy will last us. And so we felt pretty good about recommending to the board to put something on the ballot this fall. The board is still actively looking at scenarios and considerations, but we wanted to get the committee's input on some of the things that we're looking at. A little bit of a different environment than the last time we talked. So I'll turn it back over to Ashley and let you walk us through the scenarios that you prepared.
Okay. So just so everybody understands this, I'm keeping every scenario that we run now in a, it's all in one spreadsheet, and I create a new tab. This is now version 5, and version 2 was really probably version 4. I didn't really start keeping them in there until we got to that point, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is just getting too overwhelming. I have to keep every single one of them. So we've been through many versions of this. So what you have, the very first one is if we were to pass 3.85 in November, and this does not include the bus garage, so it's kind of taking that off the table. If we were to pass that in fall of 2020, the board has been pretty clear that they don't want to be back on the ballot in 2 years. So if you remember back to the February meeting, one of the questions was, what if we just did the 4 mills at that time? Now it's 3.85 instead of 7.9. What if we just did that? What would happen? And at that point, we said we would have to come back in 2 years. That's still true. It's actually worse now because of what happened last week. But the board's been pretty clear that they don't want to come back on the ballot in 2 years. They want to stretch this to 3. So in order to do that, halfway down there, you'll see, if you're looking at it, hold on, I'm looking at a printed copy, so I don't remember what colors they are. You're looking at that blue line, halfway down in the top part in the general fund where it says additional cost reduction measures. To get 3.85 to stretch 3 years, so passing a levy in calendar 23, remember levies are collected on calendar year, not on school year, we would need to cut an additional 600 to 650,000. What you've got in front of you is 600, but I would be more comfortable with 650 going into next year. That's in addition to the 350 that we've already cut. So that's to get that to stretch 3 years. That also does not include doing some projects or doing the bus garage, which is a project I think we all recognize the importance of. That's putting that off.
I'll speak to that for just a minute to update. The board had a nice discussion about that at our last meeting about the facility master planning projects. As you all might remember, we have a facility improvement plan in place, and we've really vetted the projects. In addition to the annual maintenance and repair, which is a significant budget of about $2 million for the district, there are some bigger projects where it just makes sense to do a larger overhaul. And the first one on that list was the tennis courts, which are happening this summer. They're being installed, and we were able to fund those with proceeds that were left from the bond to pay for the intermediate school. The next thing on the list was the bus garage, the transportation garage, which is out on the Gurney campus, and is not only in need of a new roof and new concrete, but also there's some, the way it functions is really not ideal for the district. And so rebuilding that would really add some value to the functionality. That was a price tag of around $2 million. We're still working with the architect on that. And then there are some other projects that are a little bit further out, but that bus garage in particular was one that we were trying to accommodate over the next 2 to 3 years and have the funds to pay for it. Given the current economic environment and the cuts that we're asking the district to make, the board has decided to delay the bus garage at least 3 years. So as we look at these scenarios, it's not officially in there, but you might want to kind of think about, 4 to 5 years out, we probably are going to need to find a couple $1 million to do the bus garage. And that'll be part of the next levies planning. Any questions on that?
Yeah, one other thing I want to point out on these scenarios, Catherine's talking 4 to 5 years out. The forecast only goes out to 24. On these scenarios, we kind of built out 25 and 26 too, just because the board kind of wanted to see a little bit further out. Those numbers, the further out we get, the less accurate we are. Those numbers, I just took the 24 numbers and just kind of carried those forward. So those are really large ballparks.
So Ashley, probably a dumb question, but is there a mandatory minimum cash balance? Because it seems like you're basing the going back to ballot, when you circle, you don't get below 11 million of cash. Is like 10 million a magic number or something, or why is there a hesitancy to go below 10 million in cash balance?
Right. Because when we get to that point, if you look at where our surplus or deficit is, the deficit going forward looks pretty large. So if you're looking at that first one, yeah, my comfort level is 11. There's certainly no law. We do have a policy that's 2 months of operating expenditures, which for us is more like, closer to 6. But our history has been, we don't really want to drop below that. And then, the longer you wait, if you wait one more year, then the ask gets higher. So yeah, I guess that's a philosophy, that it's kind of comfort level. I don't know that it's really a rule.
Let me just chime in there. So yeah, we have the 2 months of expenditures that we need to maintain. And I was the one, I think, who asked Ashley to draw this scenario out, a few more years, because one of the things that happens as you eat into your cash balance, the millage that you need to get at the next levy goes up, and the levy, if you don't do that, then your levy becomes shorter. And so it's hard to look at one levy in isolation, because you need to look at the impact on the next ask. And you may know, Jim, that traditionally going over 10 mils in the state of Ohio is a recipe for failure. We've had a pretty good standing record of asking for 7, 8 mils and having a cycle of 4 to 5 years. So it's something where our community has come to trust and expect that they'll be hearing from us on that type of a cycle. So it can change. It's just we have to be very cautious. In fact, Ashley, I would say, as we look at that cash balance, that's something I want to talk about today, because back in February, when we were really looking at this, if you look at the ending balance for 2020, we have about $13.5 million. And that was a trigger for, okay, it's time for a levy. So 11.3 makes me a little nervous personally, because it is eating into our cash balance by a couple $1 million, which could affect that next levy, or it just creates a little more pressure on the levy passing and then the next levy passing. I don't know, Jim, if that answered your question.
No, it's helpful. Yeah, it does. Yep.
And actually, I do have a question about, I know we have some of the baseline savings in here, and I could see with the medical insurance, we had like the fee reduction, but we don't have any of how much of the savings do you have in here from like going to the, fully or partially insured versus.
So in here, in this scenario, none of that is built into here. All that's built into here is what we've already made decisions on.
That was by our request, Phil, too, by the way. The board asked her to do that at the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
We asked you to only put the fees into the forecast, the savings of the fees.
Right. So, well, none of it's in the forecast because we haven't made the decision to do it. It is in the list of cuts. And in the list of cuts, the fees is
like 125,000. So
per
yeah,
year
so this
for the
the
first
number that we're I'm sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
It's okay.
Was it 125?
It's 120 to 125 a year. For next year, we only had half of it because our plan year is a calendar year. It's not a fiscal. It's not on our fiscal year. So we would take it if we were to go.
Yeah, and the 125 is in the fees, but as far as like, you know, potential actuarial savings for going, you know, fully insured isn't in there. I'm not trying to say that it should be in the forecast. I'm trying to understand that as far as the sensitivity of like how hard is it to get to an additional 600,000 a year annually in cost reduction. That's what I was trying to understand.
I wouldn't. Okay, so the potential for the self-insurance is huge. You know, which is why I really think that's the way to go. I think we've been pretty clear. I think we've had some good conversations surrounding that. The potential is very large dollars, but it's going out a couple of years. I don't know that I would count on those savings in the first year that we went self-insured. First year that you go self-insured, you know, we would keep the funding levels the same. So rather than paying the premiums to the company, we would just pay those same funding levels into the self-insurance fund, and you start building that up to get to the reserve, because there are laws around how much reserves you have to have in there. Sure. So the first year I wouldn't say, look, you know, last year MedMutual made $1 million off of us, we're going to save $1 million.
Right.
There's potential for that going forward if we continue having good years in our insurance, certainly.
We also talked about, Phil, that, you know, with COVID and all of this, we don't know the impact on insurance rates. And we just felt like, you know, putting fees in, we were very comfortable with. Savings beyond that, especially in the three-year window, we weren't as comfortable with. Obviously, we hope that happens, and that's kind of the intention, to move in this direction, but not comfortable enough to put them in the forecast.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Like I said, I was just trying to get a sensitivity of like, you know, how hard is it to get $600,000? The biggest line item expense we have are headcount. The second line item expense we have are benefits.
Yep.
So the board will be talking about what the cuts will entail as we go forward. And I think what this committee can really help us weigh in on is the dollar amount, not the specific cuts themselves, but as we're looking at what our next levy is going to be and how long it will last us, you know, do we feel comfortable with the numbers we're seeing, and instead of the specific cuts, if that makes sense, because I think that'll take us a little bit beyond what this committee probably can weigh in on.
Yeah, and one thing the board did talk about too was that we would we were going to look at like the cuts, like we were basically asked, like, do 600,000 cuts, what that look like? And if we didn't feel comfortable with that, there's a potential we could raise the actual millage too, potentially. So just because we asked for 600,000, we may not do 600,000 if we think they're too extreme. Like that's a whole discussion that needs to happen still.
Right, and we could also decide 3 years doesn't work and in 2 years we're back. I mean, not that we want to do that, but because I mean, there's so much unpredictable out there right now.
Right. Or to Phil's point, you know, we could make those $600,000 in cuts, and then the insurance a year down the road is saving us, you know, the dollars that we're hoping for, and then maybe that changes the picture too. You know, there's just so many variables right now, more than, you know, I've ever had to deal with in a forecast.
So at a high level, just to kind of recap for Jim's benefit as well, we have bond millage that's falling off in the amount of 3.85. So that number is magical to the degree that it would allow us to present to the community a no tax increase levy. But other than that, it's probably, well, we know it's on the low end because we were originally looking at asking for 7.9 this fall, had felt very comfortable that that number would get us what we need to take it out another 4 years. So it's definitely a discount to what we were thinking. And there's some things that we're going to have to do internally to make that work. I guess one of the questions is, how tight is this? I think we've identified that barely gets us 3 years with these cuts. Additional cuts we can look at, but we start to look at some tougher things to absorb. Like I said, I'm not as comfortable with a cash balance of 11.3 when 13 is kind of where we've been when we've gone to the community with a levy. So any other thoughts along those lines about the millage amount, the levy cycle?
I want to make sure everyone understands too that, and because I was asked this question, why the cut is 600 when before the governor's number came out, it was 0 and the governor's number is only 5. Why is it 6? Because the governor's cut is this year. So we've got 4 years of his cut and only 3 years to respond. So that's why it's more than that. Just so everyone understands that.
I think we also have to remember that ending balance is not the most important number on the forecast. You really got to look at that 6.01 line, and it's where when your expenditures are far exceeding is when you really want to be on the ballot. So the ending balance is not as important. You don't want to, as you start to get that the excess when your expenditures are more, and then it's harder to dig out of the hole.
And actually, I was under the impression that the board had already decided at least 650, if not more, in savings. And that we agreed at our last meeting that we wanted at least a 3-year levy cycle. I just want to make sure some of these things we don't end up.
I think you definitely said you wanted 3-year levy cycle. That's where we came, to the between 6 and 650. And we then you charged Bob and I with putting that list together so that you could see what that 650 would look like.
Okay.
I don't know that there was a decision made on that, but I mean, there was certainly.
That is definitely what we are preparing for the board.
Okay.
Right. And when I mentioned, 2-year, I'm saying, I mean, if the things go crazy and the state takes away our other, 1.2 million, that could seriously affect it and we would have to change down the road.
Absolutely.
We're just not set in stone. We're not saying when our next levy is right now. We just hope to say it's a 3-year levy.
What we're planning for.
Conditions remain what they are now.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable saying we could stretch it to 6 if we were to cut another 6, or to 3, sorry, 3, if we cut another 650,000.
I guess, I'm the rookie, so I didn't have the benefit of the board's thinking on the different scenarios. So I came in kind of clean and I looked at the 3 scenarios you sent. And as I looked at it, I kind of focused on the scenario that got us the most distance, which was 4 years. And the most time to decide how much we needed, because to me, is if we put something on the ballot in November, there's still a lot of unknowns relative to funding and everything else. And so if you go to 2021, more, you have more information where everything's shaking out, where your funding is coming in, what the school looked like in the fall. You just have more information, and I don't think the community is going to be surprised to have anything other than a replacement. I mean, it's been well publicized that the state has cut funding, right? And so I think you get 4 years, which I think is kind of ideal. you get more time to think about what the impact of all of this is, both on your expenses and your revenue. And I think the community expects that they're going to have to replace the funding from the state. So I don't think people would be surprised at something other than a replacement levy. So that was sort of my thinking is that you buy yourself some more time. And yes, you can't market it as a replacement, but I guess that's the trade-off. I just think that there's so much risk that you go in November. You think you're going to get 3 years, and one assumption can change, and all of a sudden now you have to come back sooner. So.
Yeah, the risk with waiting until next year is, certainly we would have to, we're doubling the millage that we would have to ask for. You lose a whole year of collection on that, even if we went in the spring. You lose a full year of collection. People's taxes for that 1 year would go down by the 3.85. And then if that were to fail, if we go in November and it fails, we come back certainly next year. We regroup and kind of start over. But if we wait and go to next year and it fails, then the cuts are painful. Those are catastrophic cuts that are going to happen.
Yeah, when's the last time? I've only lived in Chagrin in the district for 9 years. When's the last time we've had a failed levy?
2007.
And what was the ask?
7.9 in the spring.
I also, for what it's worth, I think that there is a huge perceived appreciation for schools right now. And there's many people that are more in touch right now with the services that the schools provide and that they now have to sort of sub in partially. So, I mean, it's not hard to see a million comments on social media, at least, talking about how they will always advocate for teachers getting the highest pay and things like that. There's a real sentiment among parents right now that they never truly understood the amount of work that goes into it. So for what that's worth, there is a real appreciation right now that has never been there before.
Yeah, just, my concern is we are fully online in the fall. The perception is that teachers aren't doing as much and we're coming in for the same amount of money. Like, to me, I'm scared of that levy failing. That's why I'm looking to do something that that should pass.
Yeah, I'll tell you from what I see around here, we're all working more, not less.
Sorry, just
go ahead.
The 2007 levy that failed, it was either 3 months or 4 months later, it was resubmitted and did pass.
That's correct.
The timing of it, though, it was coming off of the PAC and the field had been invested in shortly prior to that. And so I think there was also some confusion in the community about what's operating and what's bond and permanent improvement. And
there's a lot of story around that levy.
Yeah, but I feel a vulnerability having just opened the intermediate school around this particular levy. But I also agree with Emily. I think there's a tremendous amount of goodwill and support for the job that this district did, turning on a dime and being able to educate our kids from home in this completely unexpected environment. And I was going to ask Ashley a question, but then I forgot, so I'll pause.
I have expressed the same concerns about this fall and have a slight preference toward a spring initiative. I'm sorry, hang on a second. My home phone is ringing. Let me just go.
So Ashley, did the board consider a levy in the fall at 7.9 to kind of buffer for some of the assumptions that it just seems like we have an incredible amount of uncertainty that the 3.85 might not cover that uncertainty. And so what were the thoughts around a higher millage sooner?
That was the original plan.
Right.
That's where, you know, we were headed. And then COVID-19 happened. And I think, you know, the thought, and certainly all the board members are here, you could speak for yourselves, but I think the thought was, you know, we're entering this downturn in the economy and this level of uncertainty with, you know, people are losing their jobs and things like that. We didn't think that it was the best decision, given what the circumstances were a few weeks ago, to ask the community for 7.9 now.
Yeah, to my thinking was we had to go, had to meet the community at least part way. Like this couldn't be like, we couldn't be business as normal where we asked for, we were originally planning on 7.9. I felt we had to meet the community part way, and we had to do some of it through austerity measures where we were going to have to cut some costs and save some money that way, where we couldn't go fully what we wanted to do before because of the economy and because just everyone else is losing money as well.
You would have sounded tone deaf if you had continued blithely along going for 7%. I'm sure you recall back in February, I made a speech to go for 7.9 or whatever this fall because the economy was humming. People had a sense of financial well-being. The unemployment rate was low. The school had just recorded unbelievable test scores in state achievement tests. And at that time, I said, I can't imagine a better time to go than this coming fall, which was unfortunately picked up in the Chagrin Valley Times as well. But I have to say that 3 out of 4 of those have absolutely turned upside down on us. The only one, the exception is the school is continuing to deliver such quality education. But the economy's gone to hell. People don't have a sense of financial well-being. Unemployment is not low. It's the highest it's been since the Great Depression. It would really concern me to try to go out for something other than 3.85 this fall, and I'm not even sure that makes sense.
Yeah, well,
So I have a question.
Are dealing with all of that in their current situations, plus a lot of uncertainty.
Tremendous.
So sorry about that.
Do we know? Is there any way to get? Oh,
that's okay. Go ahead, Emily.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, is there any way we can get information? I don't know if this even exists, as to what the economic impact to Chagrin School District families have. Like, is there any way to get those breakouts? I don't know if that data is available as far as unemployment numbers or anything like that. So if we can see how how this specific zone has been affected and how significant those effects have been when we're sort of calibrating what is appropriate.
One way would be to look at RETA for the village of Chagrin Falls and see what the RETA collections are showing. They would be a telltale sign. Some of our other communities are townships, and they do not have an income tax. But that might be a way. And my sense is that RETA is saying to the village of Chagrin Falls, there's a definite downturn in your tax revenue, but I don't know what the quantification of that would be.
John, what I know we pay RETA, but I have an accountant who handles all that for me, named my husband. What is the timing of when RETA gets paid? Is that comes from the paycheck, or we send checks to?
We send checks.
It's a combination, Chair. There is a withholding by employers that gets paid over every month. And then there are quarterly estimates by people who are not subjected to withholding, maybe self-employed people or businesses, for example, who have to pay RETA. They pay on a quarterly basis.
So it would be possible to get some sort of read on that at this point.
I'll be happy to either call Bill Tomko or
Okay.
David Bloom tomorrow and get back to Ashley with what I learned.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, but South Russell would be CCA, so that's a whole another thing, and we might have to look at.
But they do give the South Russell their estimates of what the trends are. Okay, so I think
right. I mean, they might be the same, right? But they don't do Rita, so another one of those fun things.
Right.
But we have two of everything. Yeah.
So just back to Jim's point, I had some similar thinking, Jim, that, Ashley pointed out we would have a last year of collections, but the collections would be then higher over the next 4 years in the levy cycle if we were to go in the spring with a higher millage amount. Some of this comes down to just kind of levy strategy. We want to get a levy passed. What's most likely to pass, and I think we've called out that there's a lot of uncertainties right now. There's going to be a lot of uncertainties in the fall election. We don't know if those uncertainties are going to get worse, if the economy is going to get worse or better. So there's uncertainties that go into the spring as well. But that is one of the things that we're still kind of grappling with. I will say, I think the majority of the board is leaning toward the 3.85 millage this fall because it's a clean ask and it's very easy to explain to people that their taxes are not going to go up. But there are definitely some drawbacks to that. It will impact the district a little bit more. We'll have to make more cuts than we would if we were to pass one in the spring at a higher millage amount.
Well, and we have, the entire board is present today, and hearing the community members' input on timing has been very helpful for me. I also have struggled in my own mind with, if we go on for 3.85, which is no additional cost to our taxpayers, but we're unsuccessful in the spring, we have to ask for 7.9. And I'm not sure from a levy strategy how you explain that you were unsuccessful, and so now you're coming back and asking for more. And if we decide to hold off and go in the spring for 7.9, I'd like to see us get a levy committee going now anyway, and help us explain to the community that regardless of the timing and regardless of the amount that we ask for, we've worked really hard to identify opportunities to save money starting now, that we did understand the economic situation in the community, and we are actively responding.
Yeah, I would like to point out that you're not responding. You actually started that process before any of this happened.
True.
You asked us, back in July to start looking for areas where we can cut.
So we had been very successful in making cuts. We had been successful making $350,000 worth of proactive cuts, and now we are tightening our belts even further and looking for opportunities to save additional money. The truth of the matter is, prior to that, we had said, what can we do where we clearly maintain the level of programming that we offer our students today? And now we're saying, what can we do where we continue to offer an excellent education, but it might impact student programming?
I think the one big thing that needs to be clear is the collection, when the revenue will come in if you wait until the spring, and making sure everyone understands that means it's going to be deeper cuts, and the criticism, the pushback on those having been through that will be, I didn't have an opportunity to say, I don't want that to happen. You took that opportunity away from me. So that will be the pushback as we have to go through this process, I think.
I'm not sure I'm following you. As I look at the 7.9 mil scenario, there's less cuts in order for it to last 4 years. Am I misreading that?
Well, and we don't have to make additional cuts to get to the spring. I think that's what Bob was saying, but I
Right.
that wasn't my understanding.
But understand that $500,000 in cuts continues even after you pass the 7.9. So we're still making $500,000 in cuts. So that may be perceived differently as well. I mean, we could make more now and then bring things back. Or the way I've modeled it is making $500,000 in cuts, and those cuts continue even after you pass 7.9 mils.
Is that not how you did the 3.85 scenario?
Yes, it is.
3.85 is this. I mean, it's cuts beginning next year, and then they continue.
Right. So they continue just like the 7.
Right. I just wanted to be clear that asking for 7.9 isn't going to really lessen the cuts. It lessens it by $100,000, but we're not bringing things back. It stays gone.
In both scenarios. Both scenarios with regards to cuts are the same. We're not making bigger cuts in either upfront, and we don't have projections to bring them back in either. We have the opportunity to decide to bring them back when we are successful.
Swing, there is so much uncertainty in the revenue and on the expenditure side. If things swing, we would obviously adjust if we could.
And I'm going to be a little bit of a dissenting voice here and say that you shouldn't.
Emily, your mic is cutting out.
Completely ask.
Emily.
Okay, let me see if I can. Here,
your mic is cutting out. We couldn't understand what you just said. I think she's reloading her audio. I like your background, by the way.
And I think she was about to say something brilliant. That always happens. Now she's going to try and restate what she just said. And
can you guys hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, all right. I'm good. I'm just on speaker now. I think it's my earpieces. They're dying. So I was just about to say that I think that wait here. Let me see if I can. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing. You can still hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I would like to be the dissenting voice here and say, I actually think we should reconsider still asking for something additional, not just a straight no new tax ask, because I do think that there is acknowledgement in the community. I mean, depending of course also on what John is able to find out as far as the actual impact to our tax base. Because I do have this feeling, and it could be wrong, that we are disproportionately unaffected by the cuts or by the economy, but I could be wrong. We could be not considering the impact to a lot of business owners. So I'd like to know that information, but I do also think that our community is very aware of the cuts to the schools and the amount of state funding that's been removed. And I think that the community expects some kind of ask to make for that up. I think that they do. So for what it's worth, I think we should not just consider sort of the lowest. I'm not saying to be completely tone deaf and ask for the moon in this environment, but I am thinking that it's worth acknowledging the reality and expecting our community to be sophisticated enough to understand that when we get a huge, like a $500,000 cut, that somebody's going to have to help, that we're all going to have to pitch in. And I think that the community is willing and able to do that in most cases. But of course, depending on what John sees, I mean, it could be that they're not able, and that's really the question. I really do think that the community will be willing.
Emily, let me give
Thank you, Emily.
Sorry. Let me give you a preview without talking to David Bloom or Bill Tomko. The restaurants and all the shops in Chagrin have been closed for 7-8 weeks now. So all of those payroll dollars at yours truly and and all of the other restaurants have dried up. All of the retail merchants have been closed, so they're not collecting sales tax, they're not paying employees and collecting RETA taxes for the village or anyone else. So without having talked to them, I think it's going to be a very substantial decrease in the amount of revenue the village is going to get from RETA for some period of time until we can actually get the economy going again. So I think it is, but I come back and I am very much in agreement with your comments about the appreciation of parents for the job that the teachers and the administration have done to keep the ship afloat. It is it's beyond remarkable. I hear it all the time from my son who has two, a 7th and 8th grade, and how blown away he is and how good things have remained. So without a doubt, Emily, there's a lot of that. But the parents are a fairly small minority compared to the total number of taxpayers. And I do fear that while the parents are going to be disciples and very ardent disciples, there's too much uncertainty for other people. It really scares me. I hate to give away the opportunity to use the 3.85 as this will not raise your taxes by 3.85. That's a missed opportunity that's killing me, but I don't know how to capitalize on it, to be honest. So I understand where you're coming from, but my
You
reaction.
got all good points.
Yeah, he says. Sorry,
I just want to say, I would agree with Emily that I bet we're not hurt as much as the general economy because, and like, yes, those restaurant workers and all that, but I would bet that a lot of them aren't residents.
Absolutely right.
You know, so it's our residents that vote, and even this, it's hard to know, but I think in general, you know, we don't have a lot of, and I think the blue collar worker is suffering tremendously, and I think they're not who live here, you know, which is, so it's hard to know.
Well, my initial view was the higher amount later, but it was really based on not levy strategy, because that's certainly not on my resume, but it was more about giving yourself some more time to be able to nail down more assumptions in the forecast, to understand that you make sure you have the right assumptions before you go into asking the community for money. So now I have a better appreciation for wanting to not delay and not lose the opportunity of the collections. I get that. So if you want that too, then I think you have to ask for more money than what your model is telling you, because I just think you're solving for too many variables and you don't know what you need right now. If you're asking me to forecast one of our businesses on what we're going to need in the fall, I would have no idea right now, because there are so many things I don't know about demand. And you know, I would have to pick a much higher number of what my cash need was to be able to compensate for that. I don't know how long recoveries are going to take. I mean, there's just so many things that we don't know. So if you want it sooner, I just think you need more. You need to ask for more, build yourself some buffer for all the assumptions that you're making.
Or we need to raise the 650 and add an additional level of comfort. And give us the flexibility in that way. But it's interesting hearing everyone's thoughts on the timing. When COVID first happened and hearing feedback from people in the community about how the schools were responding, my first reaction was we should go on the ballot in August, actually, not even wait until November, act sooner. I don't know that I know what number we should do, but there's part of me that still feels like the timing of August might be preferential to November. I think we have a president right now who's suggesting that we might not even be able to have an election in November by mail and may not be willing to open the polls. I have no idea what that's going to look like, or if we're going to end up with some sort of Supreme Court battle over that. So there's just a lot of uncertainties around the fact that the November is a presidential election year as well. And it seems like it's going to be a complicated presidential election year. The August ballot might be cleaner for us.
Sharon, just so we're clear, August is no longer an option.
Yeah, okay, never mind.
I agree with Sharon.
It seems like the risk of going in November with a smaller number is it's not enough. But I think you're more certain to get it passed. And I think going in November with the bigger number is you have more cushion for if you missed any of your assumptions or your funding gets decreased, but you risk a failure. It's like trying to pick which finger you want broken. But I think that's the choice. If November is what it is, then you have to feel really comfortable in your assumptions and go with the replacement. And if you're not, I think you got to ask for more money or else risk coming back much sooner than you want to.
And to James's point, though, isn't there sort of a way we could thread both needles where we're asking for a replacement, but we're also we also ask for something additional to replace the state money, because everybody knows that that's gone now. So I still feel like that's not going to be perceived as a huge additional ask if we ask for additional money to bridge that gap in the state funds, because it's not as though the district is being wasteful. It's as though money that was in our pocket has been taken from us from a third party. And do you know what I mean? I think there's a way to tell that story that's effective and allows us to get at least some additional funds, as well as keeping it as the no new tax.
That's approximately 1 mil more, Emily. And then I just want to clarify, because language can be so important.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
That
I'm not good at
this is a new tax, and there is a such thing as a replacement levy. Some people actually have renewal levies. Chagrin Falls doesn't have that. So I think we just have to be careful to speak about it's no increased cost to our tax base, because 3.85 is falling off. It's no additional dollars, but it isn't.
Increase your taxes.
Right.
Right.
Part of what we're doing is we haven't seen what 600,000 in cuts looks like yet. So we still have to make a determination. Like if we see 600,000, maybe we could do more, maybe we want to do less. So until we have that discussion, we could very well increase that number to just replace what the governor just took away, or we could, I guess we could go lower, but I doubt we'd do that at the moment.
Well, the last thing I would say, and I think this is the broken finger analogy, right? Part of the fall was thinking it pushed this thing out, and we mentioned 2 or 3 years because we didn't feel like even in the spring normal was going to be returning. At least that was part of our logic, that likely are going to have some kind of restricted educational return in the fall that I would imagine takes us into January or so. And are we still at this level of uncertainty with the economy and still dealing with this? I don't know. These are all crystal ball answers that no one can,
Yeah, we are trying to punt it down the road a little bit so that in 2 years or 3 years, we have a much better idea of what we're facing and what schools look like now. So when we go to ask for more money, we have a better idea of what we need, as opposed to asking for more money when we really don't know what's coming. So we are trying to like sort of push the ball down the road, at least in my mind we are.
But given more feedback from the committee on this concept of maybe a 4.85 in the fall, your taxes are going to go up a little bit because the state just took $500,000, out of what we get.
Yeah.
I want to caution everybody that before we could do that, we still don't know. I mean, we know that they took $500,000 for this year, but we don't know if they're taking that for next year. I mean, that's still up in the air. I have to forecast it because, I mean, I have to guess, but I wouldn't feel really comfortable going and asking the community, hey, replace something that I don't know for sure that I lost.
I also think I think it's so powerful to say we're not asking you for any additional tax dollars, and we have proactively made cuts, and then we have made up for this shortcoming with cuts. Then to say to add 1 mil to what we're asking for, it's not what we need. And I don't know. It seems like then I feel like maybe then we should just ask for what we need and explain this is what we need, and it's going to carry us for 4 years, and hopefully by then we'll all know what the world looks like again.
Let's not lose sight of. I mean, you know, we all agree. I mean, and I do think it is a prudent thing to forecast revenues at 95%, right? But you know, that 5% is $1.6 million. So I mean, if everybody pays their property taxes like they do now, I mean, that certainly helps a lot. I'm not saying to add it back in, but once again, I'm just kind of driving at that sensitivity in my mind around how hard is it to make up $600,000. Because you know, if we're off, if it's like 2.5%, well, that's, you know, whatever, like $800,000.
Yeah. I think if you also did 4.85, you could say we're not adding additional money to our budget. It's a different way of saying it, because huh?
As I think most taxpayers care more about their own budget.
Yeah, I understand, but you could say we're not asking for additional money. You're giving us additional money, but our budget is still the same. We're just asking for it to keep us at the same budget. We'll manage there for a while.
So are we trying to decide upon a strategy here, or just vet the different options?
I think ultimately it's a board decision, you know, that you'll need to make at a board meeting. I think this is really
vetting the different options.
Yeah,
Sure.
But it's extremely valuable. I mean, there have been a lot of points brought up that I hadn't thought of. I mean, I thought I thought I had my mind made up. Now I don't get a vote, but I thought I had my mind made up on what we should do. You know, and now there are a few other things that I hadn't considered.
There was an article in the Journal 2 days ago that talked about mortgage firms are showing tremendous strains. And I've been following for about a year now the leveraging of America. We're pretty highly leveraged right now. And I just wonder if it's possible that the 5% delinquency is even optimistic. Because people, if they have leveraged themselves up to the house poor, have so much invested in their home that they don't have a lot of discretionary spending power. What happens if their incomes take a hit, and now all of a sudden, not only can they not afford to pay their property taxes, they can't afford to pay their mortgage, and who knows what else? And what's going to happen to the foreclosure rate? Is that going to hit Chagrin Falls? I don't know whether we're isolated from that or not. So I hate to sound like a doomsayer, but it wouldn't surprise me that 95 is optimistic.
Yeah, that's the dilemma, right? You're highlighting the risk to the forecast, which tells you need to ask for more, but at the same time, you know, that same scenario is risking you failing the levy. So
I can't afford more. I can afford more, but I'm afraid some people may not be able to.
So I think it's obvious. We can either increase revenues or decrease expenses. So I think the board needs to take a hard look at. It doesn't make sense to go for less than 3.85. Certainly, Greg, as you pointed out, sounds like we're all circling around, but kind of settling in on doesn't really make a lot of sense this fall to go for more than 3.85. So my personal input is I think I would feel more comfortable if we had additional cost savings that we were trying to achieve. If we could push that a little bit further, I think that will give me more comfort in this lasting us at least 3 years and going forward with that. It also puts us in a little bit of a better place if this doesn't pass and if we're going back, in the spring. And as you pointed out, Ashley, with giving us this analysis, and we really have to go for, the 7.9 and still have the additional $500,000 at least in cuts, if not more.
Just, I'm fundamentally still looking at the services we provide. And if those cuts of the 600,000 cut too much into the services I think we provide, my thinking is I'm going to ask for more money, more millage, because I want to give the community a chance to say, yes, we want to keep services at the level, at an excellent level still. To me, is if that fails in the fall, then we have to really start looking at, okay, the community says, okay, saving more money is more important than keeping the school at this level. Therefore, then we really have to start. So I think we need to look at cuts. We need to cut as much as we can, but we got to do as much as we can also to keep services where they're at.
Right.
I agree.
So I'm looking. I'm trying to play that balance with it. But if we fail in the fall, then by all means, we're going to have to look at cutting, because that's the community then spoke. We can't afford it.
And that's an excellent point. And I think that calls back to something that Bob said earlier about people feeling like they didn't have a choice. And so I think that there is some element, an election or a levy or any of those things are voters choosing whether or not they want that. And I think, Greg, your comments now just isolated that really well, because it may be that Chagrin parents may have experienced an impact to their income. Chagrin residents experienced an impact to their income, but everybody values the specific school services highly enough that they're willing to pitch in there, or maybe they're not, and we don't know that unless they literally all give their input on a ballot. So I think that's a really good point.
I think there's a way to go out at least 2 years, hopefully 3 at 3.85, and keep the school fundamentally what it is right now. But I'm going to be evaluating that as I hear about the cuts coming in to make that happen.
I totally agree. We've had this.
Right.
I totally agree with Greg. We've had this conversation around figuring out what the threshold is that we're comfortable with in terms of what we're willing to do now. But I think we need to do the work of identifying a deeper layer so that we're prepared in the event that we're not successful in November to take action immediately. And I also think it helps to be able to articulate to our parents what it looks like, and that we're talking about. We need to be successful because we really need this money. This is not money to do things that are new or improved. This is money to continue to offer the level of education that we offer today.
There's a lot to be said for transparency. And if we were to, and I like Greg's and Bob's thoughts about, you at least ought to give the voters the opportunity to say we do or do not want to maintain our current levels of educational excellence. If we said we want to do 385 because you will not feel it, we are sensitive, we're not tone deaf. We're sensitive to the plight of most Americans today. This will not raise your taxes, but be aware that it means we're going to have to come back to you sooner than our normal pattern, and telegraph that punch. They won't remember it in 2 years. They'll say, didn't, but at least we can be transparent about why we're doing it. With all the uncertainty, we're not going to come out for 7.9. We're going to go for 3.85 or whatever the number is. And then when the uncertainty, when the clouds part and we have a sense of where the country is going and the economy is going, we can come back to you with an appropriate levy at that time.
Well said, Jen.
It's just my gut, Mary Kay. What would resonate with me?
Yeah, and I'm all for being transparent. I wasn't trying to hide.
No,
I don't want to hide anything.
No, you don't, Greg. And I never to
Yes,
imply.
I agree with that 100%. Yes, what you just said.
Well, I think we're all in agreement that we have some tough decisions to make, ahead. We want to keep the school as strong as possible. Hopefully we'll find that we can adopt and incorporate some of these changes without feeling the pinch too much, without anybody really hopefully noticing too much, and go to the voters with something that's reasonable. So this has been really great. I think there's a lot of really smart people on this committee and a lot of great input for the board to take away and consider. So we have a meeting next Wednesday evening, and it will also be through Zoom. So you're welcome to watch and hear as the board continues this conversation and incorporates the feedback from this committee. That's also going to be at 6 o'clock. And Ashley, would you just make sure that the committee gets copied on the notice about that? So if they want to hear how that deliberation ensues, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically in that meeting about the cuts themselves and the dollars that we're trying to achieve. Any other, last final comments from any of the committee members?
The only thing I had is my company that I work for took the strategy of trying to keep as many people employed as possible. Where I told you before, like they all gave us I think I got a 15% pay cut, or executives got 50%. But part of the idea is you got to keep enough people employed so the economy can come back. If too many people are out of work, it's going to take longer and longer and longer to get back. So just some people have the strategy is keeping people employed is very important.
Any other final comments?
Yeah, no, I agree, Greg, and I agree with the strategy, and I appreciate all the community members' comments tonight. It helps us with our decision. I appreciate it. Thanks for your thoughts.
So I think we want to plan our next meeting, if at all possible. Ashley, do you want to lead us through that?
I bet my calendar's open.
You're muted. Ashley, you're muted.
Oh, Ashley.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know this message comes across when you start talking and you're muted. How long do we want to go out? Do we want to try to meet again soon before a final decision is made on a levy, or do we think that we're going to have a final decision this week? Or
could you recap the I don't know if you had the dates in front of you when the board has to take action. The first time the board has to take action to put a levy on the November ballot.
So we would have to take action if we don't add any special meetings and we just go with the regular meetings that we have planned. We would have to take action on July 8th. And then the second one would be the 22nd. We have to have by August 5th, I believe. Hold on, I have the calendar in front of me. Yeah, August 5th is when we would have to have the final resolution filed with the county. Our first August meeting isn't until the 12th. That doesn't mean we couldn't have, a special one to do that if we weren't ready. If we were going to just stick with the meetings that we have, it'd be the 8th and the 22nd of July.
Okay.
So we have two
and then
more.
In June, or in June, I'm just looking at our calendar real quick here. We're meeting.
So June, we have the 3rd and the 17th.
Okay. And you've got, I would say maybe let's meet between the 17th and the 8th. So this committee, we'll have the forecast finalized. We'll have a little bit more information about the economy. Does everybody feel comfortable with that? Either the week of the 22nd or the week of June 29th?
That's good for me.
As I've said before, my dance card is wide open.
Yeah, I got no plans for some reason.
I'm supposed to be on vacation, but I doubt that is going to be happening. So, worst case scenario, I'll be dialing in from somewhere else.
Is there a way that we could work around your vacation? Because we always want you to take vacation, Bob. It's great. You put in so many hours. I'd hate to get in the way of your vacation.
I actually return on the 22nd, so if you just bumped it a day, I'd be back.
Okay. Let me just take a look at that. Ashley, do you see a date that looks good to you?
Any day that week works for me. I don't have any vacations planned, but I was supposed to be on vacation last week and it didn't happen, so I'm not sure.
Bob, you return on June 22nd?
That's a Monday, so are Wednesdays best for this committee? Does that work for everybody?
It was triple booked tonight, so if there's any way to move it to a different night, I suspect I'll be triple booked again next month at the same time.
Catherine and I are going to run, but just tell me when and I'll be there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thursdays work better? Anyone have
Hey.
conflicts?
I'll be right here.
It is my wedding anniversary, but whatever.
I'm so glad you said that because mine's tomorrow and I totally
Okay.
forgot.
Yeah.
About
You want to
Tuesday,
go into the following week? Because we still have a little wiggle room there. That gives Bob a chance to.
We could go with the 30th. That's a Tuesday.
You guys want to do the 13th of June?
30th, 30.
Okay, 30th.
Good.
All right, let's aim for that.
Okay.
Okay, well, with that, I think we'll, is there any other business? Okay, so we'll close the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Really, really appreciate your input. And we'll see you.